Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. In today's office hour in the Purify Your Gaze community, we had a discussion on the obstacles to surrender. In his book, The 12 Hidden Rewards of Making Amends, Dr. Alan Berger points out that the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous have been heralded as the most important spiritual development of the last 100 years by somebody who's actually a Christian writer and speaker, Richard Rohr. So what happened? This system was developed as a path for healing from alcoholism, and it's built on a spiritual foundation of surrendering to one's higher power. So many people flocked to these groups because they were living a life that wasn't working for them, and they had a problem and a challenge that they weren't able to overcome, and they found some level, and they found effective, progress in terms of that when they adopted this system built on the spiritual foundation of surrender. Now, we as Muslims, there's an important lesson in that for us. Have we taken the time, even in the midst of something that can inspire us and guide us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, have we made the choice and the conscious decision to make surrendering to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the central part of our lives? The central part of our lives. When that, in fact, is what we're called for, even if everything in our lives was perfect. That's exactly what we're called to do with our lives. So it's an important reflection. But if we don't find ourselves that we've focused on that, or really reflected on that, or made a conscious effort to surrender and rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a more meaningful and deep way, then why is that? And I don't know for sure, but perhaps it's just maybe we haven't heard it loudly and clearly enough. So I'm going to try to do that right now. Struggling with an unwanted habit, struggling with a sin, is only all the more reason to submit and surrender and rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not less of a reason to do so. It's not a reason to say, I'm going to wait, I'm going to figure this out, and then I'm going to find my way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Surrender is where it starts. Surrender is possible right now. Surrender is accessible right now. Surrender is what matters right now. I hope that was clear enough. And so let's take this opportunity to explore what does that look like and what steps can I take. When one isn't focused on surrendering to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what can happen is one can find themselves in a fog of self-reliance that's characterized by perfectionism, believing that you can't make mistakes, setting unrealistic expectations of oneself, judging yourself very harshly when you do make a mistake, and failing to consider the circumstances surrounding the slip-up, right? A focus on that judgment, focusing on the external performance, on doing, being very impatient for results, and often feeling very anxious and worried, and this leads to poor overall well-being, and that can make it even harder and more difficult to make good decisions. And surrender helps lift this fog. Surrender helps lift this fog. And simply making the conscious choice to make surrender a daily part of your life, we'll look at some steps that can help with that, inshallah, can help to reveal that it's been important all along. And sometimes you might ask yourself, why have I not focused on this more before? Because it helps lift that fog, and it actually makes it easier to make good decisions and move forward in any challenge in life, including in recovery from unwanted habits. So what can you do to help with it? It starts with an affirmation. It starts with that intention to surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the thing is, that's present in our adhkar. It's present in our worship. It's present in the things that we might already be doing after all. Right? So simply standing up in salah, you're affirming your surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you want to make it personal and say it in words that you can understand, right? You can say that I admit powerlessness over this thing that's important to me, that's dear to me. And yes, that includes overcoming your bad habits. Yes, that includes that, but it also includes everything else in your life. Right? You can say, I entrust this to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I give this over to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those are affirmations. But after you make those affirmations, how many of us go to step 2, which is to observe? You made an affirmation. You can't force your heart to believe it. What's your heart's response? Be honest with yourself. Right? Does your heart accept that? Has your heart really accepted that I'm going to surrender and give this to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So observe. But observe without judgment. And that's step 3, which is to accept. Accept whatever your heart's response is. Denying the reality is not going to change anything. So accept whatever it is that it responds with, and then seek to understand. That takes us to step 4, which is understand. Right? So listen. You're not going to understand if you don't listen. Have we taken time to listen to ourselves? What is my heart's complaint? Why is my heart resisting? Why is my heart hesitant? We got to be quiet. We have to have some stillness and some quiet in our lives in order to do that. We have to dedicate some time to it. Right? Once you have some understanding, then you can choose a response. And you can respond to your heart. Right? So we're including our heart in our surrender here. You can respond to your heart at that point. And you can choose at that point that, you know what? I actually will go ahead and surrender this to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I actually will go ahead and entrust this to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a conscious choice you can make, but it's not a choice you can force. It's a conscious choice you can make and you can seek with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it's not something that you can force. And if you do this, then, and you work through the obstacles that you notice coming up, the hesitations that you notice, then you're not only aligning yourself with the truth that we're called to in our faith, but you're also opening yourself up to a way of life that's more uplifting, more healing, and frankly, in my view, it's an easier way of living when we surrender all that's dear to us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah grant us tawfiq. May Allah increase us in understanding.